Imagine a little 4-year-old girl with a laugh that could light up any room and an endless love for singing about 10 little monkeys jumping on the bed. Now picture her world, which should have been filled with love and safety, turning into a nightmare she couldn't escape. This is the story of Liliana Wright, a child who deserved a better life but was failed by everyone who should have protected her. This isn't just a tragic tale, it's a complex puzzle that unravels a web of neglect, abuse, and a system that let her slip through the cracks. Brace yourself, because this story will break your heart, make you think, and leave you with a haunting question: why didn't anyone save her? It all began with the broken voice of a paramedic who said in a TV interview,
"I remember, sorry. I was holding that little girl, but she wasn't breathing anymore. She was cold. She was only 4 years old. But her eyes, it was like she'd suffered for a lifetime."
Liliana Wright was born on January 22nd, 2012, in Galveston, Texas. But the first moments of her life were not happy at all. Her mother, Jerry Quezada, was not there to hold her in her arms or whisper loving words in her ear. Instead, Jerry was behind bars, where she had been sentenced to 6 years in prison for robbery. The bond between a mother and her newborn should be instinctive and sacred, but for Liliana, that bond didn't exist from the very beginning. Her father, Brian Meeker, was also not in a position to take care of her. The responsibility was too overwhelming for him. So Liliana was sent to the home of her paternal grandparents, Alice and Craig Cluckley, in Mansfield, Texas. This couple weren't just grandparents. They became the parents Liliana needed. Alice and Craig gave Liliana a world full of warmth. They taught her how to walk, talk, and laugh. Craig played with her in the backyard, and her laughter echoed through the air. Liliana loved animals, especially the chickens that roamed around the yard. And her favorite song, 10 Little Monkeys, was her anthem of joy, which she sang with a bright and innocent voice. For a while, Liliana's world was safe, joyful, and full of love. But storms were on the horizon, and her small piece of peace was about to fall apart. Every few months, Alice and Craig would take Liliana to visit her mother in prison. Jerry Quezada wasn't just a woman who had made a mistake. She was trapped in a cycle of addiction, crime, and chaos. Her older children had already been taken from her due to neglect and placed in their father's care. Jerry's life was filled with arrests for drug use, drunk driving, and domestic violence. But Alice and Craig believed that Liliana had the right to know her mother. These visits were bittersweet. Liliana, still too young to understand, would sit next to Jerry, her face sometimes full of confusion, sometimes sadness, but always with a trace of love for the woman who had given her life. But these visits were more than just simple meetings. They were reminders of a struggle that was shaping Liliana's life. By December 2013, everything changed. Jerry was released from prison on parole, and the system made a decision that would change the course of Liliana's life forever. Despite her history of addiction and neglect, despite her inability to care for her other children, Jerry was granted custody of Liliana. A girl who had only known love and stability with her grandparents was suddenly thrown into a world full of uncertainty. Why did the system entrust such a vulnerable child to a woman who couldn't even save herself? That is the question that echoes throughout this story, and it's only the beginning. Jerry's life was a storm of addiction and poor choices. Her drug use didn't stop after prison. It became even more intense. Heroin, chaos, and lies had consumed her. And now Liliana was caught in the center of that storm. Alice and Craig sounded the alarm and reported to Child Protective Services, CPS, that Jerry had been using drugs even during her pregnancy with Liliana's younger brother. They pleaded for someone to intervene, but their cries were ignored. CPS received multiple reports about Jerry's drug use, but no action was taken. No one came for Liliana. No court stepped in. This little girl was trapped in a home filled with anger, drugs, and emotional neglect. Then Charles Wayne Pfeiffer entered the scene, Jerry's new boyfriend who appeared in September 2015. Charles wasn't just a bad influence, he was a walking red flag. His history included domestic violence and neglect. But for some reason, the system allowed him to become a permanent part of Liliana's life. His presence turned an already toxic environment into a living nightmare. The girl who once sang with joy changed. She became withdrawn, aggressive, and terrified. Her behavior was a silent scream for help, but no one listened. By February 23, 2015, the signs were undeniable. Alice saw bruises on Liliana's face, marks of wounds that no child should have to endure. She reported this to CPS, and in an interview, Liliana, scared and hesitant, revealed that her mother had hit her. But even with this confession, the investigation went nowhere. The bruises, the fear, the reports, all were ignored. Liliana was left in that unsafe home, surrounded by those who couldn't or wouldn't protect her. Alice and Craig fought tirelessly to save their granddaughter. They tried to gain custody of her, but their lawyer, Gregory Houseworth, advised them to settle out of court and warned that going to Judge Haddock's court could jeopardize everything. Looking back now, it's frightening. Why was their lawyer so afraid of the court? Why didn't he try harder? Later, Alice filed a complaint against Houseworth with the Texas Bar Association, believing that a court hearing could have saved Liliana's life. In October 2014, 2 months before the scheduled hearing, CPS had evidence showing that Liliana's half-brother was born with drugs in his system, and Jerry tested positive for drugs during the investigation. But the Cluckley's lawyer did not present this evidence to the court. Instead, an agreement was reached. Jerry kept custody, and the Cluckleys were granted visitation rights. The judge signed the agreement without hearing the case. No one questioned Jerry's ability as a mother. No one examined the evidence. Liliana was entrusted to a mother who was falling apart. One particular moment breaks the heart. When Jerry came to take Liliana, her eyes widened with fear. Her small body froze, clinging to her grandfather, trembling and begging him not to go. She wasn't just a child who didn't want to leave the playground. She was a 4-year-old girl who knew something was terribly wrong. Her fear was clear, but no one did anything. CPS received 29 calls within 1 week from people worried about Liliana's safety, but no worker ever met with her face-to-face. A special investigator stopped following up when the family wasn't home. The system failed her at every step. March 12, 2016 was the day Liliana's nightmare reached its peak of horror. It all started with something simple. Liliana, sick and unable to keep food down, refused to eat. For most people, this would be a sign to care for the child. But for Jerry and Charles, it was an excuse to unleash their cruelty. They beat her with bamboo sticks and a belt, each blow harder than the last. The marks on her body were more than just bruises. They were a map of their anger. But it didn't stop there. In a moment of unimaginable brutality, Charles grabbed Liliana by the throat, lifted her small body, and slammed her against the wall. A 4-year-old girl was thrown like a rag doll. The terror continued. Charles, wearing gloves, forcefully poured an oral hydration solution down Liliana's throat, adding to her trauma. Later that same day, Liliana was found with her hands tied in a closet, trapped like an animal in a confined space. She was not only physically broken, her spirit was shattered. Alone, terrified, and completely abandoned, she had no one to turn to for refuge. Jerry, perhaps with a flicker of guilt, tried to bathe her, but it was already too late. Liliana's body could no longer go on. She collapsed, her spirit so broken that she had no strength left to fight. In a desperate attempt to save her daughter, Jerry performed CPR and told Charles to call 911. But his response was shocking. His voice during the call was calm and indifferent, as if he were discussing a minor issue. There was no panic, no frantic effort to save a child who had just come through hell. When authorities arrived at the house on March 13, 2016, they were faced with an unimaginable scene of horror. Liliana, only 4 years old, lay lifeless on the floor. Her body was cold and covered in bruises, with marks of bindings on her wrists and signs of severe trauma. Jerry tried to lie, claiming that Liliana had slipped in the bathtub, but the evidence screamed the truth. Charles stood beside her, strangely calm, as if untouched by the tragedy they had caused. The first responder who arrived at the scene was unprepared for what he saw. Holding Liliana's lifeless body, he described her as cold, with a face covered in bruises and wrists, showing marks of bindings. He began CPR and rushed her to the hospital, but deep down, he knew she was already gone. The doctors tried to revive her for 30 minutes, but the injuries were too severe. The responder's hands trembled as he recalled the moment and admitted it was the first time in his career that he was completely overwhelmed by emotions. Liliana's small, broken body haunted him, a reminder that from the moment she was returned to that home, she never stood a chance. As the investigation progressed, the truth came to light. The autopsy revealed that Liliana died from severe trauma to her head and abdomen. She had been beaten, kicked, and slammed so violently that the wall of her abdomen had struck her spine. DNA found under Charles's nails showed that she had resisted, a heartbreaking sign of her struggle. The marks on the wall showed where she had been thrown. The evidence was undeniable, and they painted a picture of a child tortured by those who were supposed to protect her. In court, Jerry pleaded guilty to the serious charge of child abuse and, in exchange for testifying against Charles, was sentenced to 50 years in prison. She admitted to slapping and kicking Liliana, but tried to place most of the blame on Charles, claiming he was the primary cause of the injuries. Her sentence was a small step toward justice, but it couldn't undo the pain she had caused. She might be released after 25 years, a reality that shocked many, including Alice Cluckley. Charles's trial was a different story. Facing charges of murder, he was confronted with overwhelming evidence: DNA, marks on the wall, and Jerry's testimony. His defense team tried to discredit Jerry, portraying her as an unreliable addict, but the evidence was too strong. The autopsy photos shown to the jury were devastating. Dr. Mark Krause, who performed the autopsy, called Liliana's injuries death by 1,000 cuts, and described bruises covering her from her waist down to below her knees, some older than the night she died. He confirmed that the fatal blows resulted from severe trauma to the head and abdomen. The jury, with tearful eyes, convicted Charles of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as inhumane and monstrous, and wished there were a harsher punishment. Brian Meeker, Liliana's biological father, testified during Charles's trial and gave a heartfelt statement. His voice cracked with emotion as he recalled his last visit with Liliana just weeks before her death. He had taken her to see Santa Claus at a mall, a joyful moment now stained with sorrow. He described how Liliana screamed and begged not to be returned when she saw Jerry approaching the house. "You should have let me keep her," he said, burdened by guilt that was crushing him. The pain of being unable to save his daughter was a wound that would never heal. The community gathered around Liliana's memory. A memorial service was held at Macy Berg Funeral Home, with over 60 people attending to pay their respects. A candlelight vigil was held at Catherine Rose Memorial Park in Mansfield, where supporters wore yellow t-shirts that read, "Justice for Liliana." The event was not just to honor her life. It was a fight for change and accountability from the systems that had failed her. Alice and Craig were at the forefront, speaking openly about their loss and their fight for justice. Liliana's case in Galveston was not an isolated incident. Child abuse rates in the city are rising, with 7.4 confirmed victims per 1,000 children in 2022. That year, 659 children in the county alone were confirmed victims. 80% of adults involved in child welfare cases struggle with substance abuse, and over 60% of children removed from homes in Texas cite parental substance use as the primary reason. Liliana's story reflects a larger crisis. Children caught in the crossfire of addiction and neglect, betrayed by an overburdened system. The failure of CPS to act despite clear signs was not just a mistake, it was the result of systemic neglect. Liliana's caseworker was fired, but that wasn't enough. Systemic issues, overworked staff, inadequate training, and poor communication allowed Liliana to slip through the cracks. Her story forces us to ask, how far must we go to protect the vulnerable? Can justice truly be served for a life unjustly taken? Liliana Wright's life was short but unforgettable. Her love for singing, her laughter, and her spirit live on in the hearts of those who fought for her. Her story is a call to action, a reminder that we must do better for our children. Share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments. How can we fix a system that fails kids like Liliana? Like this video, share it, and check out our other videos. Together, we can keep her memory alive and fight for change.